Fellow governors, Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Ms. Joan John, and Dr. Alvin Hille, delegates and representatives of other regional institutions. Good morning and welcome to our 42nd meeting of CARICOM Central Bank Governors. Our meeting is taking place against the backdrop of a global economy that is still stuck in low gear, even as new risks to growth prospects are looming on the horizon. Closer to home, output in many Caribbean countries is still below levels prior to the eruption of the global financial crisis, some 6 years ago, while regional policymakers are grappling with managing high public debt, the frequent reoccurrence of natural disasters, and financial sector stress. Given the varied nature of the challenges facing Caribbean economies, no single solution exists to address all of our problems. In fact, I remain convinced that as policymakers, we must consider bold and far-reaching solutions to help our Caribbean countries better navigate the turbulence of the regional new normal. Yesterday at our caucus meeting, CARICOM Central Bank governors did just that. We took two bold decisions. First, we decided to move ahead with implementing a restructuring plan for the Caribbean Center for Money and Finance so that the center would better support the policy research requirements of CARICOM Central Bank governors. Second, we decided to move ahead with designing a CARICOM regional financial arrangement. Such an arrangement would provide financial support to member countries facing temporary balance of payments difficulties. Since the global financial crisis, these regional financial arrangements have become increasingly more important in the global financial safety net. This morning, in my opening remarks, I would just like to focus on an issue which I believe CARICOM Central Bank governors should also take a bold decision and should also be playing an active role. I refer, of course, to the Caribbean's heavy public debt burden, which has become a cancer, eating away at the heart and soul of Caribbean economies. The situation is particularly serious for 9 heavily indebted middle-income Caribbean countries. These 9 countries are considered neither poor enough nor severely indebted enough to benefit from international debt relief initiatives. Caribbean policymakers have repeatedly argued in various fora that this thinking by the international community is flawed. It ignores the fact that nominal GDP per capita, which is used to measure income levels, is a rather poor measure of Caribbean countries' vulnerability to exogenous shocks and to climate change. In the meantime, the economic situation of these 9 heavily indebted countries continues to deteriorate, with repeated sovereign debt restructuring and increased probability of sovereign debt default. Since the start of the 2000s, 6 of these 9 Caribbean countries have concluded debt restructuring operations, and 3 have twice restructured their debt. Grenada is currently restructuring its sovereign debt, which, when completed, will bring to 10 the number of sovereign debt restructuring episodes in the Caribbean within the past decade. That's an average of 1 debt restructuring per year. The IMF insists that fiscal adjustment must be at the heart of any solution to stabilize and reduce the Caribbean's heavy public debt overhang. On this, we can all agree. However, our views diverge on the degree of fiscal adjustment required for Caribbean countries to achieve public debt sustainability. Such adjustment is neither socially acceptable nor politically desirable. The IMF estimates, for instance, that Grenada, whose public debt is around 110% of GDP, has to undertake a sizable fiscal adjustment of more than 10 percentage points of GDP over 3 years to restore debt sustainability. Barbados, with a public debt of around 95% of GDP, would have to undergo a significant adjustment of close to 10 percentage points within 3 years. St. Lucia, whose public debt is about 75% of GDP, has to undertake a fiscal adjustment of just under 10 percentage points within 3 years. High debt, mid-income Caribbean countries seem to face an impossible choice between never-ending fiscal austerity or a debt event, and these debt events could be triggered by a terms of trade shock, sudden political turmoil, or even a serious problem in the banking sector. So what we have existing is that despite the regularity of sovereign debt crises around the world, no international consensus exists on a global framework to undertake an orderly, predictable, and equitable restructuring of sovereign debt. This week, Argentines are busy taunting Brazilians for their humiliating defeat in the World Cup and are anticipating World Cup glory this Sunday in the finals against Germany. However, Argentina could create another history. Argentina's legal dispute with its holdout minority creditors who refuse to renegotiate debt payments and want full payment once again brings into question the inadequacy of the global system for restructuring sovereign debt. Unless it cuts a deal before the end of this month, the Argentine government stares a second debt default in the face, bringing us full circle to 2001, when Argentina defaulted on its near US $100 billion in debt and shocked the global financial system. The lack of a global consensus on reforming the system for restructuring sovereign debt is of critical concern to Caribbean small states, who are caught in a high debt, low growth trap for the past 2 decades. I therefore welcome the recent decision by CARICOM heads of state to appoint a CARICOM debt advocacy team to advocate appropriate debt relief and/or debt amelioration arrangements for highly indebted CARICOM countries. Advocacy without a strong debt resolution plan, however, will not find traction in the international community. We need a bold economic solution to address the silent Caribbean debt crisis. We need an innovative debt solution. We need a solution that shows the international community that we, as small states, are willing to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And we need a creative debt solution that the international community will endorse. In other words, we need our own Caribbean sovereign debt initiative. Such a Caribbean sovereign debt initiative would recognize that too little, too late appears to be the dominant experience in sovereign debt restructuring rather than too much, too soon. Sovereigns tend to delay debt restructuring, and when they inevitably do, they are often not sufficiently ambitious in obtaining a sustainable debt burden. The purpose of such a Caribbean sovereign debt initiative would be threefold. First, to provide a permanent exit for heavily indebted mid-income Caribbean countries from repeated debt rescheduling. Second, to remove their onerous debt overhang. And third, to safeguard the balance of rights of private creditors, the official sector, and a Caribbean debtor country. Such a Caribbean sovereign debt initiative should take into account lessons from the enhanced HIPC initiative, which was launched in 1996 by the IMF and the World Bank to ensure that no poor country faces a debt burden it cannot manage. The experience of Guyana, which graduated a few years ago from the HIPC initiative, and that of Haiti, which is currently a HIPC country, would certainly prove useful. The Brady Plan also offers some useful lessons for Caribbean countries that have built up considerable debt from commercial sources. The Brady Plan, which was designed to address the debt crisis of mainly Latin American countries in the 1980s, constituted a major international policy shift, as for the first time, the U.S. Treasury, the IMF, and the World Bank all started to encourage outright debt reduction as a means to restore developing countries' debtor solvency. The Caribbean could also draw lessons from Europe's recent experience with sovereign debt crisis management, including the Greek debt exchange, which attempted to use good faith negotiations and fair burden sharing to balance moral hazard, respect creditor rights, and restore market access. I therefore believe that CARICOM central bank governors should seize this opportunity to work with the CARICOM debt advocacy team in helping to craft a regional sovereign debt initiative. Once that is done, then we can lobby our international development partners, such as the G24, the Commonwealth Secretariat, and the Organization of American States, to support our cause and to advocate on our behalf. Civil society, in the tradition of the successful Jubilee 2000 International Debt Relief Campaign, would also prove to be a key partner in this process. In closing, the Caribbean debt situation is an extraordinary problem. It requires extraordinary solutions. CARICOM central bank governors must be part of this extraordinary solution. We must not be victims of our own circumstances. I thank you.